You know battling food in your body doesn't work. You want to love and accept yourself. And because you're insatiable, you want results too. And wouldn't you know, you bring the same intensity to your life, wanting to maximize your time, potential, and experiences you have here on this beautiful and wondrous planet Earth. Fair warning, it will be a roller coaster, but for those insatiable, that's your prime time to thrive. We're here to say yes to the hunger of wanting it all. I'm your co-host, Ali Shapiro, a health coach who helps people end the losing battle of dieting and find a truce with food.
And I'm Juliette Berg, nutritionist, fitness expert, and the co-owner of Unite Fitness Studio franchise.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 28 of our Insatiable podcast. Today, we have Bob Schoenholtz, who is such a special guest to both Juliette and I. I have a very funny story of how I came across Bob that I'm going to share in a minute, but he has had such a profound impact on both Juliette and my life and our own healing journey from our various lives. So we were kind of joking before we even got on that I had opened Bob's resume and it's quite impressive, but I never really knew all that he had done because I had gotten a referral from him from an integrative physician. And I remember it's a pretty personal story, but it had been the fall of 2011 and I was feeling really depressed. And I intuitively knew that talk therapy wasn't for me. I had been to a therapist before. It was really helpful, but just felt like that wasn't it. And I had called a modern day shaman that I knew very well from Facebook, who I still really respect to this day. And I did a soul retrieval with her. And I was telling this integrative physician about this soul retrieval. And he was actually interested and curious. And as he asked me how it went and all this stuff, I started crying. And he was like, Ali, I think this is what you need to work on. And I have just the person for you. And his name's Bob. And he's an art therapist. He said, you actually don't need a shaman to be the intermediary for the healing that you need to do. And I said, okay. And I remember, I don't know if you remember Bob, Dr. Rosenzweig.
Of course, I do.
And it was so funny. As he left, I said to him, how did you make it through medical school? Because he was such a different type of doctor. And he said, Ali, that was my near-death experience. And so I called Bob, who was in Center City at the time. And I remember Bob sitting down with you our first session. I don't remember if you remember, but I said, if you're going to tell me that my cancer happened for a reason, like I just can't handle that. And you're like, it didn't happen for a reason. You're like, but it might have given you access to other things. And it was the first person who's ever framed something in such a way of opening and allowing me to make new meaning of what had happened, or at least let me know that I had the choice in how that happened. And that really was a profound effect. And the work that we did, which we'll weave in and out today. And I know Juliette also, that I referred, a ton of my clients, including Juliette. And Juliette, you told me what I said to you about how I referenced Bob because it was such a different type of therapy than I had ever done. And what did I say to you you got to go see him?
Yeah, you were raving about him at our friend Sarah's house. She had a bunch of people over for a get together, and you were saying how it was so transformative, and you were talking about the imagery therapy and all of the guides that were coming to you and all of your experience. And it was so intriguing to me because I'd only done talk therapy for most of my life. And it just seemed like a really, really different kind of healing experience. And then, of course, you were like, and he was in Oprah magazine. So I'm like, well, then I've got to see him. So
I want to share all of this with the listeners before we actually talk to Bob, because I don't think I would have been open to this even though I went to see a shaman over the phone.
Oh, you saw the shaman over the phone?
Yeah. She actually does really well with sound, actually.
Oh, cool.
But it was still something that was I'm so cerebral and analytical. It was something that I don't think if I had been referred by an integrated physician. And yet it also at the same time, now having gone through the process, it has just actually made me realize how wise the body is. And things like what we're going to talk about today, feeling fat and body image, how it really isn't about what we look like. And so I really want to give people a window into some of the other meaning behind that today. So, Bob, thank you so much for being you and being here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's be hard to live up to being me after that introduction.
Well, and I love for everyone listening, I said to Bob, I'm going to just, give the highlights of your resume. And he's like, it doesn't even matter. It's just most important that you two, that everyone has a good experience with him. And that's so true. You, Bob. That is just so you. But Bob does have an extensive art background, which I just love and I think is so important and shouldn't be separating from the healing process. He's also, I'm trying to find, licensed in professional counseling. He has a Bachelor of Arts and then also has studied at Penn, where he got his Master's of Science. And Bob, do you remember, I don't know if you remember one of our sessions, we both laughed because what we do is so holistic. We wondered if they knew at Penn what we were really doing.
I know. I know.
So Bob has tons of, and his bio will be on the podcast website, but tons of, therapy background. He's a teacher of graduate art therapy. And so, Bob, I think to kick it off, will you give us your definition of visual imagery and how you found this as an access point for therapy?
Well, I'm not sure exactly where to start there, but having been trained in art, I developed a relationship with imagery that came up from within, not so much the imagery from outside. And over the years and being trained eventually in counseling, I also started to realize that people use imagery very much in their languaging about explanations about anything, but in particular about their body and about as a way of understanding things. It comes up often as images. So I had the opportunity quite a long time ago to study knowing through imagery. The idea that if you can relax your rational mind and allow your irrational, unconscious mind to come up a little bit, what happens is that images start to flow. It's a lot like being in a dream, except that instead of being asleep and having sort of no awareness of it, there's enough ego that you are present for the dream. You know what images are coming. And you can relate to these images in a way which can help them to be informative instead of just sort of being trippy and scary and fun or whatever they are. There's a way that you can relate to these images. They're informative, and they are informative because they come from your unconscious. They're an aspect of you, an organic part of you. So over the years, I developed a method of working with people which enables me to help the people to see how to use that imagery as a way of knowing that doesn't depend on the rational mind. And the rationale for that is that if you're going to depend on your rational mind, you can pretty much talk yourself into or out of anything. The rational mind is very facile with, I want this or I want that, or this is good for me or that's not good for me, depending on what's the fad now or what happens to be attractive in the moment. And when you allow your unconscious to be more present, there's sort of a more authenticity about it. So the dialogue that happens then between this sort of exquisite balance of your rational mind and your unconscious can bring up all kinds of authentic information about who you are and lead you directly to where you need to heal most or where you need to grow most. So to sort of sum that up, Carl Jung talked about consciousness itself as being composed of 4 parts: thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuiting. And when you look at his writing, intuiting was pretty much always about imagery in one form or another. So it's thinking, feeling, sensing, and imagery. And he said those 4 things should be in balance in a person. And, I think in our society, for the most part, most people are not in balance. That's mostly rational mind, some feeling, some sensing, and very little intuiting. I think intuiting is not thought of as being as important as the rational mind in general. So this is a way of balancing all that.
Yeah, I remember you saying to me, this isn't about dumbing down your intelligence. It's about bringing up the intuitive side of you. And that was really helpful. Like, oh, these don't have to compete, but we need all of them to be really knowing. And one of my favorite quotes from Jung is he says, intuition doesn't contradict reason. It's outside the province of reason. I love that because it's like when you look back on your life, granted, we're narrative creatures, but often what didn't make sense going forward or looking back, you can make sense of it. It just the big picture wasn't exposed yet.
Yeah. I think it was Pascal that said the heart has its reasons, which the reason shall never understand. I love that quote. And it's the same kind of thought.
Yeah. So will you define imagery for the audience? Because if I had never heard of it, I'm like, is this pictures? Is it a sensing?
Is it hypnosis?
Yeah. Define imagery, how you're referring to it.
Well, so two things. One is imagery itself, and the other is the process of engaging with imagery. So imagery itself is not just visuals. Imagery is pretty much anything that comes from the unconscious. So it's a little misnomer in a way, but feelings are part of it. And just a lot of people, interestingly enough, when they do imagery, they don't really have any concrete images. The two of you both had pretty concrete images, but a lot of people have just sort of a sense of energy. And sometimes they can assign a color to it or kind of heat or movement to it. And sometimes they don't. It's just a feeling of the movement of energy. And that is one of the most powerful kinds of imagery. So you can see it really covers, in a way, the three of Jung's outside the rational mind packages, right? The feeling, sensing, and intuiting. So the other part of it is the process of doing imagery. It's really, I don't know if either of you would relate back to it being as a little hard to learn maybe, or a little hard to kind of adapt to doing it, but it's often difficult for people to relax the rational mind. They're guided into sort of relaxation, and then relax the rational mind so that you're not analyzing, you're not judging, and you just start to allow these images to flow. And then instead of it sort of drifting into daydream or getting lost in it formlessly, the rational mind kind of holds the space for it, almost like a frame that holds an empty space for this freedom to take place, constraint for the possibility of freedom. And then within that constraint, then a narrative can arise. And you shape that narrative by your expectations and your needs. So if there's something really pressing in you that needs healing, it's going to come up. So here's a little talk I gave both of you, I know, in the beginning, because I give it to everybody, that if you were to scratch yourself or cut yourself in your skin or something like that, your body knows what to do to heal. And it will just go about what it needs to do without any conscious intervention from you. It might be possible that it would be complicated enough that it would get infected or something, and then it would inform you by hurting, throbbing, that kind of thing, that I need help here, and you would clean it out and wrap it up and do whatever you need to do to protect it. But once you do that, the body takes over again, and it's the body that does the healing. It's all set up to take care of that for you. Well, I think it's exactly the same parallel kind of process in the mind, that when there's a problem in the mind, it will want to move toward healing. And you just need to set the conditions right for it to be able to heal. And imagery is one of the ways you can do that. It's really interesting that when you work with children, it works really fast, because they haven't sort of healed over the wound so much. It's all pretty present, and they're very comfortable with imagery. They can talk in images, and it's easy.
You think about children. I remember all I did was play pretend with myself all day long when I was a kid. Just imagine things, make up whole universes, and frolic around in the woods for hours.
Sure. There's a lot of testing and a lot of growing, and it's kids kind of know what to do, and adults kind of get trained out of that. So this is a way of sort of going back to that sort of simple, organic kind of process.
Now, when you're saying that the mind knows that it needs healing, would it be fair to say that there are symptoms that arise that are telling people this? Like, anxiety or depression, or like even physical ailments that are coming up, like pain?
Absolutely. They're analogous to, let's say, the throbbing of an infection.
Mm-hmm.
There's a kind of pain which should bring your attention to a problem. It's the function of pain in the system, is to bring your attention to a need, a problem.
We were just talking about this yesterday, Allie and I, about physical pain and how do you know that this physical pain is coming from emotional trauma, or is it something that's coming up from you fell off your bike 10 years ago and now all of a sudden it's, you're out of alignment. So, those kinds of, like, how do you tell?
Well, sometimes you can't. It's tricky. Well, that's it. Part of the thing is that, I don't know, we're getting a little philosophical here, but
6 more credits, I would have had a master's in philosophy. It's my thing.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah.
You might as well just go back. Add it on.
I can't do another thesis. That was the end of me.
Oh, God, yeah.
So the thing is that I question sometimes, and I think I really believe that the body is just the densest part of the mind.
Oh, I love that. I do too.
And I heard that, Allie, just to bring in one of the things full circle, I heard that from a shaman.
Oh, really?
Yes, in a training that I went to. And I wrote that down really quickly, and I've kept it ever since. And my meditation experience kind of brings me to that as well, that really mind is more the essence of who we are, and the body is just a denser kind of manifestation of the mind. So it's really tricky. On the other hand, maybe it's not so tricky sometimes. A pain brings your attention to something and, you work it through. It can sometimes be very obvious whether it needs to be worked through physically, or sometimes it's not so obvious. And the problem is that, think of yourselves before you came to see me, no one has been informed about how to access this information through their imagination when all that information is there.
Yeah, I think you said a really interesting point that I actually in grad school had a big debate with one of my professors, because I was using the term mind in one of my papers. And she said, and in academia, you have to define your terms.
Oh, yeah.
It was a really important discussion that we had. And she said, the mind has never been actually located. People use this term like mind-body connection, but the mind is actually an invisible projection of your body and thoughts together. And I have to wrap my head around that concept, because it basically is describing imagery, that what you're seeing is a mix of sensation, what you think that sensation means, right? It's all 4 of Jung's ways of knowing, often mixed together. And to your point that we don't often know, I remember when I came to you, so I'm the first generation of childhood cancer survivors. So they were like just so excited that we were physically, as a group, living. There was no emotional healing, and having to go through an experience like that. And I remember going through talk therapy when I was 26. And then that really helped me. And I realized a lot of my depression and food issues were around that. And then I was like, okay, I'm changing my life. Like, I'm going to make new meaning of this. It's put me on this new path. And I thought, I never realized that. So when I came to you, Bob, I was like, I'm second guessing myself in ways that are very out of ordinary for me. I'm actually a pretty confident person. Or so I thought. And I wasn't confident in the areas that were vulnerable. And as I said to you, the pain for me was like this doubt and the sadness that had come up. And I thought that I had been through I think the work that we did together for an entire year was basically going through the grieving process of having had cancer. And I thought I had been through that because I intellectualized it and I had made new meaning, but the body was still storing all these ways that I wasn't accepting how vulnerable that experience really made me. And so I think that's a kind of a concrete example of how the body sometimes lets you know. It was the sadness on top of this out of ordinary second guessing and something missing. And you said to me that feeling like something's missing can be a reflection that part of you is missing. And you said shamans will call it soul loss, but I think it's a loss of confidence when you have trauma and you haven't actually owned how you've reacted to it and worked through it on that deepest, densest level, which was the body in this case, and the sadness that was coming up.
Yeah, that soul loss and loss of confidence are really 2 ways of saying the same thing. And the experience of soul retrieval, where you reintegrate a part of yourself that you've had to dissociate, when once that's reintegrated, you experience a gain of confidence. So these are the same thing, really.
Yeah. And what I've realized with body image and being thin, or a lot of it, and this is what I've seen. And again, I have probably a certain sample size, but so many people project, and this is what I had done. And Juliet, I'd love for you to chime in too. Maybe you came to the same conclusion, but being thin is this projection. My clients will say, well, I know that my life isn't going to make a complete 180, but I'll feel more courage. I'll be the real me, and I'll be more bulletproof. I'll take more risks. Nothing will hurt as much. And what I think they're describing really is this resilience that can only come from going back to the places where you've been wounded the most and healing from those. And that wholeness is what we're really projecting onto weight loss and being thin. It's not the thinness. It's this idea that, I will feel whole. But it's so hard to deconstruct that projection until you've traveled very far.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, when I saw Bob, it was a little bit different. And I was going through my own crisis, not depression, but you just used the word disassociation a minute ago. And something that I've dealt with most of my life is, since I was 9, I've had these bouts of disassociation where for anywhere from 30 seconds to 3 weeks at a time, I feel like I'm in a complete dream state and I feel like I'm not really real. It's hard to describe. And maybe, Bob, you can elaborate a little bit more on disassociation. It's still...
Oh, you've said it pretty well.
And it's a terrifying state to be in. And it's a way of protecting yourself from grief, trauma, emotions. You basically just feel numb. Yet you're having massive anxiety at the same time. So you're not really numb, but you feel like you're not really all there. You feel like there's just a fog around you. And it's very terrifying. So when I saw Bob, that was something I was going through a bout of that, but I had been going through it since I was really young. And through the imagery, and then we'll get back to the feeling fat and the body image because this is all connected. I'm not going to go off on a tangent, I promise. But through the imagery, when we were talking about soul retrieval, I had to go back to that little girl that initially was feeling those feelings of wanting to disappear. And I noticed the pattern of my whole life from having neglect. I basically wanted to numb myself, and I did it in many different ways, through food, through actually when things would get too tough, disassociating and just feeling completely numb, through over exercising to kind of just, that's a form of disassociation. Like all of these things I was doing was basically to escape the trauma and the feelings that I was having. I never wanted to face them. Through imagery, you get to actually face those things and go through them. And, I had images of me being that little girl, and Bob can talk about this a little bit more, but you actually are confronting that child part of you that was sort of lost, because there's a development that kind of stops right there when that 3-year-old version of you, 8-year-old version of you, whoever or however old you are, has that trauma. If you don't really work through those feelings, you're sort of stunted at that place. And so we went back and did the work to sort of confront that side of myself and bring her home. And when we talk about soul retrieval, we're talking about completing yourself a little bit more. But with the whole, feelings of fat, I did that all the time. Anytime I would start to feel those feelings of loss, loneliness, anxiety, I would internalize it as, I feel fat and I don't feel good about myself. Something's wrong with me. My body is disgusting. I hate myself. All these horrible things I would say. It was an easier way for me to confront the scary emotions, which are, I feel lonely, I feel scared, I feel uncertain, I don't know what's going to happen. And so that started for me, it's interestingly enough, right around the time of my parents' divorce is when I started to notice myself saying that I need to go on a diet, I'm fat. So, and I think that happens for many, many people. Something traumatic or some situation that's very uncertain, they internalize it onto themselves.
And I think part of imagery, Bob, what you say is to go back and own how you reacted to it. Not in I know Juliet used the word confronting, but I think it's more of a safe way now that you're older and have the adult perspective, even though you're going back as that child. Would you say that, Bob? Or is that, you're the expert.
Yeah, I would.
Tell us what happened to us under your...
Well, actually, it's really interesting. You're the experts on your experience, and it's interesting to hear you both talk about your experiences in your language. There's no argument about any of that. In terms of how I would describe the same kinds of things, when you go back, when you talk to an image of your child self, it's a little safer than just trying to remember what happened to you and talking about it, because there's a little bit of a distance there. It's almost as though there's this observing you that's talking to the one that's in pain.
And also, do you think it can be re-traumatizing for somebody to just, if you ask them, I would like you to go back to that day that such and such happened and recount all I think that can re-traumatize someone.
Well, actually, there's evidence about that. That people that work with trauma advise it's not always such a good thing to retell the story over and over and over again. My wife and I went to New Orleans for a conference shortly after the big flood down there, after the hurricane. And when we were in restaurants and bars and things like that, people always wanted to talk about what happened to them. And as a therapist, I know that's probably not the best thing, but I wasn't being a therapist. I was just having fun. So I didn't try to stop anybody or correct anybody. Yeah. But I felt like there's a desperate need for them to resolve something. And people often feel the need to, maybe if I talk about it, resolve, but maybe it's just reinforcing it too. The context of the place and time that you give the narrative is also very important. When you feel safely held in an environment like a therapist's office, and you trust the person you're with, and you let these things up, it's a whole lot different than when you're thinking about it on your own or you're talking to your friends. It's a whole lot different. That safety and that feeling of being loved in that moment is huge.
And I'm just thinking that you can use retelling your story either to your advantage or disadvantage.
Yes.
Because I'm just recounting all the times that I told the story of my dad's death growing up. And like when people would ask me, what happened to your father? And I would go into I woke up and I found him laying on the floor. I don't want to have to go through that story again. Or I should say that I used to talk about it a lot, and I would use it almost to my disadvantage in that it would re-trigger a lot of emotion for me, but I was not over the situation. I think it was it wasn't until I did it in a safe space and worked through it that I was able to, I could tell the story now without having a panic attack. But I would start to tell people and I would start to feel panicky. I'm like, why am I even doing this? This is every time I tell this story, I'm suffering.
Yeah, you're recreating it without resolution. Mm-hmm. It's almost like there's this anxiety to take some action and do something, but it doesn't lead you necessarily toward a resolving kind of behavior. Another example of this that I think I may have discussed with one or both of you, because it comes up a lot in my office, is this idea called the repetition compulsion, mm-hmm. in which people find themselves repeating a behavior over and over again that's always unsuccessful, and they can't figure out why they wind up picking the same potential partner or a potential partner. It feels like a different choice each time, and yet somehow that other partner begins to behave in the same kind of ways that earlier partners did that made the relationship unsuccessful. And the reason that happens, I think, is because the unconscious is leading the person toward a possibility of resolution of a certain kind of painful process. So here, let's go. Let's try it again. But if you don't have enough awareness of what you're doing, then you just kind of stumble into behaving the same way. Imagery helps you to see why you're doing that, how it's different, and my experience is then people wind up making different choices as a result of it.
Yeah, we had Dr. Dana Bonenheimer on for episode 13 on trauma, and she said diets are the hallmark of repetition compulsion.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of it is about underneath the tension between being invisible versus visible, which, you know, Juliet, I was thinking when you were talking about your disassociation, right? If you feel visible or invisible, like there's tension and everything. It's just interesting how it plays out in different ways. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, Bob, that you talked about what I've noticed with my clients, and I'm working on helping them make this connection, but they have to, you know, do it in time. But often they will feel fat when they feel unsafe. They don't know that at the time. But you talked about when you do imagery in a safe environment and you feel loved and held, it's a very different experience than, you know, when you're feeling that feeling, whatever it is, out in the world where you don't feel safe. So I'm curious about when people say they feel fat, or have you had clients, do people come to you? I mean, I would think that, like, I didn't come to you because of food stuff. I had worked through a lot of mine. However, I did notice that through the year, it was one of the toughest years of my life, 2012. But by the end of it, like, I had a little bit of a track in my mind of good and bad foods. And after that experience of just embracing all the messiness of some of the things that I hadn't resolved, I noticed that the categories of good and bad in my food were no longer. They were obliterated. And I took that as metaphorical. I'm just more comfortable with uncertainty now. But so I'm assuming that most people don't come to you saying, this is going to help me with my body image or whatnot. They don't know that, but I'm sure that it is a side effect. Or do they? I'm curious if you've ever worked with people specifically around their weight with imagery.
I don't think anyone's ever come to me with their initial complaint being about their body image. But I've had lots of people get to that, where they'll start to talk about it because I think they start to see the relationship between their anxiety and their body image, and how when they're anxious, their body image feels more distorted.
Can you talk more about that? Because I find that fascinating.
Well, it is fascinating. There's another aspect to it also. I mean, when I go to the gym, there are times when I'm working out at the gym, and they always have, mirrors everywhere in these gyms, I'm working out at the gym, and I'll be aware of my body in a way where maybe I'll glimpse myself in the mirror, and before it registers that that's me, I'll have a sense of what I see in the mirror. And I try to match it then with what my inner experience is. And it's so variable. It's totally unpredictable for me. There are times when I can feel like, oh my God, I'll never make any progress. I'm not losing weight. I'm not building. I'm not doing anything. What's the point? And there are other times where I feel like, yeah, this is great. Keep going. And I don't think it has anything to do with what I'm seeing.
100%. I can attest to that in a day span, where I have to look in a mirror all day long with training clients because, there's mirrors. Mm-hmm. And it can be in the morning where I'm like, I'm looking good. Yeah. And it could be by the end of the day where I'm like, oh my God, like how much did I gain 10 pounds recently and I didn't notice? What's going on here? In the span of a day, this can happen.
Yeah. So the perception of the body is related to the mind, right? And so it could be that you're not feeling safe, you're not feeling loved. I think actually that's often the bottom of it, is not feeling worthy and not feeling loved, and starting to think, well, what could possibly be wrong? Maybe it's my body, that there's something wrong with me relating to the body. Other times it's that, maybe you're a little bloated that day. Maybe you've retained some liquid that day, because of too much salt last night or something, And so then you have this other experience of the body, and it's generalized. You think, I can't make any progress. I can't do anything. I feel like the things that I've heard from the two of you about food make so much sense to me, because it's not about being obsessive in dieting. It's not about getting compulsive and imposing a system upon yourself that you may or may not be successful at. It's about feeling yourself. It's about feeling what's right for you and going with that. One of my teachers, Heinz von Förster, used to say, always choose to increase your number of choices. And I think that that's part of what I hear the two of you do, in a sense, is that how do you increase awareness in a way that allows you to make choices about things? Dieting isn't about choice. Once you choose your diet, then you don't have any choice anymore. You have to follow this rigid kind of plan, which sometimes works until you stop, and then doesn't work anymore,
But with choices comes a lot of mistrust for people, right? They're scared because they don't trust themselves to make the right choice.
Yeah. Well, so then it goes back again to worthiness and lovableness. Am I okay? Do you have the confidence to be able to say, I'm doing the right thing? And
because no one really knows if we're doing the right thing. That's a made up constraint.
Yeah,
it is.
It's the right thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but there is a feedback system, right? Because
that's true.
Your body will tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was we actually talked about this on our Q&A episode. I realized several years ago, I don't even remember when it was, that this was when I was still like worried about my weight, and I would have the same wardrobe, right? But like some days I would feel fat or whatnot. And I realized I made this intuitive connection that the days that I was going out into the world and my approval was up for grabs, or, that's when I felt fat. And it was almost this permission to shrink back in a way. And what's really interesting, especially Bob, after our work together, is whenever I am now heading into very uncertain situations like keynote talks, which, I've done them before, but they're like, people are judging you, right? I don't worry about my body anymore. I notice my health. I become so paranoid about my health. I'm like, what kind of air am I breathing? Like, I've only been filtering my water. I need to get back to Bikram because I don't sweat a lot. But like, I recognize the pattern, right? It's so irrational. But now that I've worked through the illusion of what being fat is about for me, it's now the health issue, which I don't know if I'll ever get over. So if someone feels fat, I want to give people some beginning steps of how to work with this sensation of feeling fat, or they feel insatiable. Sometimes people feel insatiably hungry. And I love your counterintuitive advice, because people are like, and the traditional advice is, say a mantra, like, no, I am loved and worthy, or whatever. But you say to greet the image. And so can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, one way to work with this is, let's say, to use, one of your examples, I'm feeling fat today. And so I notice that I don't feel very good about myself. Instead of trying to compensate for that by, choosing some certain kind of clothes or, whatever one would do to compensate in a sort of superficial way for it, one thing you could do is ask an image to arise for that part of yourself that feels fat, and greet it and thank it for coming, and ask it why it's here right now. What does it have to show you or tell you that you need to know about the experience of feeling fat? Now, that could lead in many, many different directions, right? It could take you into childhood experience. It could take you into kind of an awareness about your ego and how your ego is present for this particular thing. It doesn't need to be. It could take you anywhere. There's no predicting it. And I have no expectations when I guide people into doing that, because I really want it to be idiosyncratic. But wherever it takes you, if you stay engaged with that image, it will help you to understand what your struggle about feeling fat is about.
And what do you mean by engaged?
Engaged, it means to be open to the information and the feelings that arise as you are aware of this image, and you continue to dialogue with it.
And should people be lying down? Can they do it standing up? How much time?
Well, when people start this, it's often a lot more formal than it is later, because it is a learning process and you get good at it. So in the beginning, you can formalize it a little bit by either sitting or lying in a way that you're really comfortable, and doing a kind of relaxation piece where you maybe do a progressive relaxation, relaxing all your muscles. The idea with that is to be in your body and not so much in your head. And so you're aware then through the relaxation more of your body. And then when you ask an image to arise, it's coming more from that kind of body experience than it might have if you were just in your head. So after you get comfortable with it and it feels like you trust the process to do that, then you can do it anytime, and you can do it. It can be very brief, and you can get a lot of information very briefly. you can multitask this once you're really good at it, in the sense that, your left brain is having a conversation and is sort of aware of what's happening in this moment, and your right brain is in imagery. So that, then as I'm talking to you, I can be informed by an imagery guide about the more subtle aspects of what's happening in this conversation right now. But that's pretty advanced. In the beginning, you just engage with the images, and the tough part of the practice is to keep the engagement. It's not like once it greets you and gives you some little nugget of information, and then you're done. You stay with it. You stay with it. You stay with it. And you notice when fear comes up or dissociation or confusion or something, you tell the guide that I'm feeling this, and it will continue to help you to be more and more present and more integrated in yourself.
Yeah. And for those listening out there, when you were saying, Bob, you have to sort of like greet it with no judgment, and judgment will arise, and it's okay, because who knows what images will come. But the images I remember that came for me were so childlike and so strange sometimes that I'd be like almost like wanting to laugh at myself. Like, really? Is this the image that's happening right now? I mean, Winnie the Pooh came a lot and would talk to me. Like, it was always like weird, like childlike animals, like a Cheshire cat from Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
And so then your rational mind is like, well, am I just making this up? Like, is this not really like coming from my unconscious? But if you set that aside and then you just bring yourself back to being in that moment, being with those images, I just think, just for the people listening out there, like, it's okay to question for a second and then like return back to the image and then question again. Like, that will happen, right?
Yeah. The answer to that question, am I just making this up, perhaps surprisingly, is yes.
Totally. It's like, where did that come from, right?
I love you, Bob.
No, but it's true. But like, having not watched Winnie the Pooh since I was 6 years old and not seen anything, it's like when you're dreaming, right? You're like, where's that coming from when you're having a dream?
Well, you're making it up. It's coming from your unconscious. It's coming from the same place your dreams come from. And if that's the activation of your imagination as a way of knowing, that's the thing that I get really excited about, is that imagination is a way of knowing.
And I think it's important too, Bob, and when you talk about this, in the same way that like everyone's images are going to mean something based on their own context of their life.
Yes.
So like, it's so fun to go to dream books and be like, oh, I dreamed of, Winnie the Pooh, and this is what this means. But like, why you have to stay engaged with it is because it's going to be about the meaning that that's had for you in your life.
Oh, that's so true. It's so important. Years and years ago, when I was working in mental hospitals, I remember I was at the time adhering pretty closely to the standard psychotherapy, art therapy model. And when images came up, I was using the standard interpretations for these images. And there was one instance that really just turned me around about that. And that was that somebody did a drawing in which they drew the walls to their room as this bright red color. And the traditional interpretations for that probably would have gone toward this person is angry, or, something like there's strong, passionate feelings going on here. But instead of just making interpretation about it, I said to the person, I noticed that the walls are red. Tell me about that. Well, the walls were red in their room when they grew up. So, it may have had an effect on them, but it wasn't the effect that the interpretive model would have. And so I started moving away from interpretive models. And even though some of them have some validity because they really tested over large populations, and so that means like in a bell curve, 65% of the people are going to match the interpretation. I just don't go with interpretive models at all. It's always individual to me. It's always, what does it mean to you?
Yeah. And I think too, for people listening to, I'm someone who tends to be impatient. So if I don't get it on the first try, I'm like, oh, this doesn't work. But I remember in our sessions, Bob, for me, an owl was often present in the beginning, and it wouldn't talk to me, which was, I feel like it was like my unconscious being like, this is not an analytical game, Allie. You have to learn something else. But
that's what it was.
Well, and I don't know if you guys can see, but Carlos bought me this owl because it's like now my spirit animal, because that owl was there all the time. But I remember the first couple of times the owl just I couldn't get any meaning from it. And then I remember some of the most profound, even to this day, I think about those themes, and it's influenced how I actually view nutrition and healing. But the one time I remember the owl wanted me to just sit in all this oil in a tree. And I was like, I can't do it. I can't do it. And finally I just did it. And I remember crying, but I felt so like dirty, but that was metaphorical for just like being in pain, which I had never gone to the heart of. And then I remember that owl, a couple other sessions took me always in the sky to rooms where I was little girl. And I remember still being in this sweater and pants, and I was trying to detox. I remember trying to be in these like saunas, that the owl had guided me to these saunas in the woods. I can't believe I'm sharing this. It sounds so crazy. But I remember what I took away from that even to this day was like, I've always like the idea of detoxing and cleansing, which is so popular in culture these days, is like to just purify without actually living through the mess. And that owl, while it was quiet the first couple times, it eventually led me to things that I wouldn't even be able to still verbalize the transformation that happened when I actually just came back to the images and stuck with it. And so I just share that so people can, this could be over days or weeks, that it is like a story. Like what's the ending going to be? I don't know. And I think for people who are very intellectual or cerebral, there is a knowing. And you may not think that you'll know because you question yourself a lot or doubt, but you will know, the emotion will arise, I guess and would you like to add anything to that, Bob, or give something
Sure.
I didn't include because it's just my
Sure. Well, I've seen a lot of times, of course, where people come to an image which feels like a really salient image, something really important, but it won't interact with them. And I think by and large, the reason for that is because the person is not really engaged yet. They're not, there's some kind of resistance or defensiveness, disconnection that needs to be repaired in order for that part of yourself to really begin to engage. So that means that the original awareness of the image is the beginning of that re-engagement with a part of yourself. But it sometimes takes some time to figure it out. I guess I want to be careful to say that this isn't a blaming kind of thing. This isn't like you're inadequate or you're afraid or you're whatever. This is more like, how do you do this? It's a learning process every single time. How do you do this? The overall imagery process is not, that you can learn, and you can learn how to do it better and better and easier and faster and faster. But with each fresh image, it's a whole new learning experience because it's a part of yourself that some part of you said, keep this at a distance. And so when you reintroduce it, you've got to kind of relearn. Well, so how do I do that? And is it really safe? And, what's going to happen? I mean, this is a big one. A lot of people have the experience like, if I do re-engage, how will I be? Mm-hmm. Will I still be me? Will I change in a way that's okay? What's going to happen?
That's so interesting because that was the hardest year of my life, and yet I wouldn't take it back. I feel like I got so much of myself back, and a calmness and that I had never had before.
Yeah, the calmness, I can say the same thing for me.
Yeah.
Working through that, as scary as that time in my life was too, with my worst bout of disassociation I've ever had, it taught me a lot about myself. And that I couldn't run away from it anymore. I couldn't disassociate anymore.
Well, actually, you could have, but you didn't. You decided not to. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of one of the remarkable things about both of you is that you both decided, I'm going to test this out. Okay, I tested it out. I'm going to, my relationship with Bob. Okay, I feel safe with Bob.
He was an Oprah.
The process.
We refer to he's safe. I'm just.
Process seems good. I'm going to go for it. And, you both had a tremendous amount of courage to just say, I'm going for it. I'm all in. I'm going to face myself with this. And your courage, by the way, is reflected, I think, today in you're so revealing about yourselves. This is your courage. It's just, it's manifests very clearly.
Well, Allie, you were talking about in the Q&A, and we were talking about how do you know when someone's ready. And a lot of times you said the clients that come to you you're their last resort. Not that Bob was my last resort. I didn't really think of it like that. But I was definitely at a point where I was like, fuck this. I don't want this anymore. I want to be present for this. I don't want to have these feelings anymore. I don't want to feel numb. I'm ready to feel the feelings, and I knew that the reason I avoided them for so long because I was I was just surviving, and Bob, you said you're in a good place you're not surviving anymore. You have stability. This is the time. And, just trusting that process. So.
But that's what I think that's a really interesting example though, because I know for me, because that part of me must have been gone for so long, right? Like 20 years at that point. The running and the self-doubt had become so normalized that I didn't even know that it could get better. And I think
it's who you think you are at that point. This is me. And so when someone introduces the possibility that you're more than that, it's like, really? Like what are you suggesting? That and how will it change me? Will I still be me if I'm willing to take this big leap? I hear that a lot, and I felt it myself when I was in therapy.
Do you think this is one thing that we actually had a conversation about in Truths with Food? Like the psyche, I always find that because I work on story transformations with my clients, like the unconscious stories, not on a visual imagery level, but on an intellectual but a meaning making level, because it's still somatic, but it's more sensing, I would say, than intuitive healing and feeling. But I find that life tends to bring you what you need. Like, I don't think I would have been ready to see you probably even a year beforehand. And so I'm curious, this is just more a philosophical, theoretical question. Do you think the psyche brings us what we need when we're ready?
Yeah, that's what I said before. I think you begin to notice what's available to help you heal even when you're ready for it, and you don't even notice it before. Of course, that's somewhat ameliorated by people's defensive systems and stuff like that, but which can mask seeing opportunity. But the fact that you can see opportunity means your psyche is ready for it. It's part of the fundamental philosophy that I work with imagery, which is your psyche knows what you need. And if it comes up, you can trust you're ready for it, or it won't come up. You won't even know it's there.
Yeah, and that your psyche is in your body. I mean, I think I obviously took a ton away from our work together, but to me, I left in awe of what the body lugs around for us and what it stores. And that I really think the body is it's the densest storyteller of us. not just our weight and what we look like, but, I mean, it really holds and it is the truth teller of if you've really resolved stuff. I mean, how
I like that phrase, the body mind, because I don't like the distinction that it's a body or a mind. To me, as I said before, if the body's the densest part of the mind, then it's really one thing. So I like that phrase, the body mind, and I do agree in a sense that the body is holding these things, but to me, what that means in a more refined way is that our mind is tricky. And that it can create the illusion of there not being something there, whereas the body isn't so tricky. It just is. And when you're more in touch with it, then it gives you lots more information that the mind can trick you out of.
Well, and it kind of comes back to that saying of it is what it is. And I think with the images, you don't feel like they're good or bad. They're just there, and just figure them out in a way.
And would you say another good way of accessing imagery for people who are trying this out would be just to focus on a place in their body, maybe that they're holding tension, and derive the image from there? Because I think that we did some of that with myself with, I'm feeling a lump in my throat, or I'm feeling heart palpitations, or my stomach is hurting. And then just to start with that place and say, okay, go, can you find that feeling and what images arise from that feeling in your body?
That's one of the best ways to work, actually, with imagery. Probably told each of you that at one point during our work, because I try to sort of plant the suggestion that maybe you'll use that because the body doesn't lie. And there are lots of times when a person is sitting in my office with me and they will be telling their story, like what their week was like or what they're going through. And of course, a lot of that is still in their very rational mind. And you could see like a twitch will happen in their face, or they'll reach for their arm because they felt something there or something in their body. And it's just almost a half unconscious thing that they're doing, right? But I'll say, what happened there? What was going on? And they'll say, oh, I felt a little twang or something, and I'll say, well, you want to work with that a little bit? Bring your awareness to that place and ask an image to come from it, and ask it why it came at that particular moment, what it's come to tell you. It's amazing how deep a person can go when you follow that kind of thing.
So much of stuff like that is unconscious, in the way of, I remember I would grip the steering wheel when I used to drive. Mm-hmm. I would death grip the steering wheel. And I wasn't even aware of I was doing that.
Yeah.
Things like that, I think, sometimes we're just we're unconscious of how we're holding our body.
Yeah. Let me say one more thing that I think is important. It's kind of maybe an overriding kind of idea with all of this. I'm not sure whether I ever discussed this with either of you. A lot of what we're talking about when we talk about mind here is about ego. So it's involved with how we identify ourselves and our defensive systems to protect that. And when I'm talking about the body mind, lots of times I'm talking about something beyond that, a kind of a transcendent idea of mind, which is not caught up with ego and defensive systems, that the sense of who I am is not just the historical biological me, but that there's something more expansive. And when you can be in touch with that more expansive sense of self, lots of these body problems and distortions just fall away because you recognize them as manifestations of your ego. And so that's a kind of imagery where you can imagine yourself as being a more expansive being than just the ego self.
That's pretty meta, Bob.
I know.
That's why we love you. So it's about time to wrap up, but I just want to recap. So if people are feeling fat, or they feel the twitch, or they want to get into imagery, kind of what you said, the first thing is to calm the body down. At first you have to make it formal. Either do some deep breathing, lie down, and just really give yourself a chance to relax. That's step one, correct?
That's correct.
And then the second one is to ask an image to arise. Or if someone is feeling fat, or they're feeling body image distortion in general, do they greet the distortion? Do they say, thank you, fat, for coming here? Like, how would they? Well, I'm curious.
No. You greet the image that arises from the experience of feeling fat, and so the image is a kind of an imaginal manifestation of an experience, and it personifies it so that you can deal with it.
Okay. And that could be a sensation, it could be a color that you see, or it could be something more concrete that...
Well, it's most likely it's going to be an animal or a person. And it could be a historical person, or it can be an imaginal person, but it's more likely that like your owl, it's going to be an animal or a person. And then you engage with that. Try not to make meaning about the animal. I've had people that the initial animal was a rat, and they go, I don't want to deal with that one. And I say, well, just try it. And what happens is that it's a rat because it's the whole resistance kind of thing coming up, and that it transforms in the process of imagery to something that's more compatible.
I had a crocodile.
Yeah.
Talk about scary.
Scary and powerful.
I think it was a cute crocodile, though. But all animals are cute to me.
Well, I love that because I think we have a pretty cerebral crowd. So really just hang with the image and maybe revisit it every day, or when, don't just do this when you're in panic, but commit to it. Almost like making it your meditation, right? Meditation doesn't have to just be trying to clear your mind. And then to your point, the third step is just to keep engaging with it, not in a trying to figure out what does this mean, but thank you for being here. What do you have to teach me? And see what unfolds with the image.
Yes. In fact, my role as a guide when I'm guiding a person in imagery is basically just to help them to stay in touch with the image. And there's a little bit more than that because I'm experienced with it and I can see maybe if they're missing something, they have a blind spot or something like that. But it's basically 90%. It's to help them to stay engaged with the image because people don't really know how to do that in the beginning. They're likely to greet the image and thank you for coming, have some kind of interaction, and then start thinking about what's going on instead of stay with it, follow it all the way through with the image as the guide to tell you what needs to happen. You can think about it later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, another just key takeaway from this episode is about body image being more sensation based, not really visual, what you see in the mirror, but to Juliet's example and Bob talking about his gym example, it really is so much more. And I think a great experiment, people try looking at yourself in the mirror before a workout and then after, right? Your sensing and your chemistry is going to be completely different.
That's right.
And it just to kind of open that door that maybe your body image isn't what you see. And I know a lot of people think they have distorted body images, but I think in reality, we all see our bodies always different. Like, and who knows?
Constantly changing.
Who knows what we really look like? You don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
You're only making meaning of what you're seeing.
Yeah. So, Bob, thank you so much for being here. Now, if people want to do visual imagery, we know that you're retiring in a year. We will have Bob's information on alishapiro.com/podcast, episode 28, Bob's picture, his full bio. And you do distance clients. Do you have openings?
A few right now. A few. I do distance clients. My preference, though, is to have a person-to-person meeting or two just to start out, so there's a kind of a good resonance, and then it's not a problem to do distance. I would also refer a person. They could look at my website. I don't know. Are you going to publish that on the thing?
Yeah. theinwardeye.com.
Theinwardeye.com. I also have a blog, which I really haven't updated in a really long time, but it's got a lot of good information on it called knowingimagination.com. All one word, knowing imagination. The other thing that I would mention that you'll see references to in both places is that the professional training that I got lots of different trainings in imagery, but the professional training that I got was from the Academy for Guided Imagery in California. So any professionals that are out there, including the two of you, who might want training in this kind of thing, that's there. And one of the people that started that is Marty Rossman. And he's got lots of books and CDs that teach how to use imagery. Oh. Really good stuff.
Yeah. And is on the resource for the Academy of Visual Imagery, if someone's in another state, because we have people all around the world listening, can they if they do want to work with someone, can they find a practitioner on the website? Yeah.
The Academy for Guided Imagery has a practitioner listing, certified people.
Okay.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because there are people, all over the place that have been trained.
Yeah. So if this resonates with you.
Yeah. The other thing is, art therapists don't all use the imaginary process the way I do, but they all use imagery in a way. So looking for an art therapist might be useful too. And you can find one through a practitioner list at the American Art Therapy Association site.
Well, and I know we're going to wrap up, but I do have one question. Do you think that art, and that means the act of being creative, I don't mean just painting, but I mean, if you do, interpretive dance or writing or painting or anything that employs that artistic side of us, do you think that helps?
Oh, totally. As I said, I'm sort of headed toward retirement, and my big plan is make art. And the reason for that is not just because it's fun. It's because it grows me. I continue to expand. I find parts of myself that I never knew were there. The way I like to make art is with found objects and the surprise of what happens when I start putting things together. And, it makes me feel more in touch with the whole universe when I do that. So
we'll have to have another episode on this, Ali, but I think that creativity is something that is missing so much in people's lives and is a big part of what makes somebody feel whole. And so we'll have to figure out a way to incorporate that into another podcast.
For sure, because I think creativity generates that sense of possibility. And I think often that's why people embark on weight loss because they think that it is a sense of possibility. Oh, either I can wear new clothes or I'll be more confident or I'll finally date or I'll life. And I'm saying all this stuff because this is all stuff that I used to believe, but it was like this doorway into endless possibility. But really you can access that now. And I remember Dr. Brene Brown, who Juliet and I love, and I don't know if you're familiar with her work, Bob, but she has a quote that says, "Unused creativity is not benign." And I really like that. Yeah, because it's not saying that it's malignant if you don't, but it's saying that, that it is not neutral if you just ignore your creativity. And I think it's so important. So, Bob, thank you for being so instrumental for both Juliet and I. I really feel like it was that final push. I mean, we're always healing, right? It's a spiral staircase, but you'll always be, big part of that pie for me. Gluten-free, of course. No, I'm just kidding. But thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And just knowing the two of you has been wonderful. I'm so glad that you've stayed in touch.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Insatiable podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can connect with us on social media. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Juliet Unite and Allie at Allie M. Shapiro. M stands for Marie. Please feel free to also email us any questions. We would love to hear from all our listeners. You can reach us at Allie at allieshapiro.com and Juliet at unitefitness.com. We'll see you next time.